Thank you, John, for such a wonderful introduction. And thank you again to Carnegie Mellon University's Humanist League and the Pittsburgh Free Thought community. And thank you all this evening. Thank you for being here today. I really do appreciate it. In case you were wondering, yes, this is the Playboy that I was featured in. So just had to make that a little clear. Once again, my name is Mandisa Thomas, born and raised in New York City. I've been in the Atlanta area now for going on 20 years, actually a little over 20 years now. And just a bit about me. I wasn't formally raised religious. I consider myself sort of a unicorn within the community. And actually one of my passions is hip hop music. And so I'm going to go into the background of the title. So I debuted this talk in 2017 in the Northern California area, starting with the Sacramento City College, the Secular Student Alliance group there. And the advisor of that group and I were trying to come up with a title for the presentation because we were concerned about whether it would be too provocative, whether it would bring people in, but we wanted to make sure that people would attend the meeting. So he presented 5 titles to me, and the last one was Fear of a Black Atheist. Now, how many of you in here are fellow hip-hop fans or at least know something about the genre? Yes, good. That's a good number. So I'm sure some of you may know where I'm going with this. You know the rap group, what is it? That's right, Public Enemy. And so you know they have an album called Fear of a Black Planet, which was very, very popular in the late 80s, early 90s, very socio-politically conscious rap group. And when I saw that title, I laughed so hard, not because it was funny, but because it was just so ironic. It was so good. But we were concerned that I was a little concerned that it might be a bit too provocative. But when I talked it over with my sister, Bria, she said, no, you need to go for it. And it's so appropriate for this type of talk because when it comes to the dynamic of religion within the Black community, it ties that in. But also this idea that maybe we are fearful of a black planet. And with that, I will go into the presentation. So, first of all, Black atheists, we do exist. We're not unicorns. There are more of us out here. There are more of us that are starting to assert our identity. And I will say that some of you, John here is the treasurer of the American Humanist Association. I think he can attest to the fact that they produced the Humanist magazine. They have never had a person of color, much less women, featured. And last year, they had 5 of us that were featured last summer. And what this speaks to is, again, the emerging presence and visibility of Black humanists, atheists, et cetera, and the fact that we are expressing ourselves a lot more. And I would like to read the quote, one of the quotes from the Playboy article prominently featured here, which says, the most encouraging moment of the weekend, the convention weekend, comes when I introduce myself to Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, an organization dedicated to support and visibility for Black atheists. Now, there are many people who ask why. Why is there a need for support, particularly for Black atheists? And we're about to get into that. So we must understand why religion defines the Black community, because it does. And this is verified by Pew Research. Approximately 79% of the Black community identifies as religious. Now, Blacks make up only about 12.4% of the U.S. population. Now, while the rise of religious nuns, that is a rising number. Now it's about 25 to 30% approximately. 79% in the black community is still a very, very high number, especially considering the demographics. And one of the reasons for this is that slavery in the United States compelled African captives to accept Christianity. Now, there was a discussion group earlier today that I attended, and there was a young man who said that his faith defines his morals, and that he thinks that religious people have misused the doctrine over the years. But let's be clear that the church sanctioned slavery, the transatlantic slave trade. That cannot be ignored. That is a matter of evidence. So if we're talking about this good institution that essentially sanctioned human trafficking and the torture of millions of people, we have to, we cannot ignore that fact. And also, but even with slavery and the institution forcing African captives and the enslaved to accept Christianity, and this was also a matter of law within the United States. Once slavery ended and once the Reconstruction period ended, the black church became a primary source of support. And this was once institutionalized, and legal racism, Jim Crow laws, were enacted and reinforced, which effectively disfranchised many blacks in this country. And so there were institutions, there were schools that were created out of these churches, and they supported them. It was also where many blacks could assert their sense of identity and feel like it was a sense of a safe space. Because, and it was one, and really, there were many people through those very tumultuous years were able to rely on their churches and their faith to get them through it. So it became a defining institution. And also, during the Civil Rights Movement, yes, we do acknowledge that there were many religious leaders that played a huge part in representation with the black community. And also they were strategic, they were centers for being able to plan and meet and strategize. So there were many civil rights planning meetings held in various churches. So it did serve a very, very useful purpose during a period of time where it was needed. So we definitely do not disregard that. However, in acknowledging the positives of the black church previously, or the church previously, religion really has, and you can verify, Pew Research has verified the statistics on religion within the black community. But we must also talk about how religion has crippled the black community. First, it has hijacked the image of the black community historically and currently. So how many of you here are familiar with Dr. Carter G. Woodson? Okay, now that wasn't as many hands as before, which is not a good sign. But, this never fails to resonate. But Dr. Carter G. Woodson was an African-American historian. He wrote the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. He is the founder of Negro History Week, which later became Black History Month. Dr. Woodson was a freethinker. He openly challenged the institution of the church. He also challenged the institution, the public education system, and how effective it has been to not only the United States, but also the black community. So here's why this is significant. One of the most important months in our calendar year really belongs to us. And this isn't just about black history. This is also secular history, humanist history, and American history. So this is why we need to redefine and reclaim that narrative. And many within the black community tend to disregard this fact. It also ignores how blacks became predominantly Christian in the first place, and especially in these United States. Again, we're going back to that discussion about the good that this religion is supposed to project, or the many good people. And truth be told, there are really some good Christians. However, there is really some bad stuff in that Bible. Much of it has to do with a lot of subjugation of people, and much of it is in the New Testament. And these are things that people conveniently forget. And, you know, there are many in the Black community which will say, thank God for slavery. And also, this was perpetuated by other good Christians. Many people forget that the Ku Klux Klan was not a Nazi organization. It was a good Christian organization. And they felt like they were doing their Christian duty. It also reinforces dependence on divine intervention. Now, while we can acknowledge that many credit their strength through their faith, this faith also tends to be very, very blind. It also feeds into other aspects of our general lives. And within the Black community in particular, there is still a heavy dependence on divine intervention, that something or someone else will come in and save us. It also reinforces this need for other people to become a savior, that because the position of pastor and leadership was so very highly revered, it's also an aspiration. It's a very strong aspiration, and many people just seek to lead without doing much work. That somehow somehow this great person will come into our lives and just lead us to the promised land, like Moses. And that's just not how things work. So there is a heavy reinforcement on this this point of view here. It perpetuates homophobia, sexism, hypocrisy, etc. The Bible and other religions in particular are very, very bad. They are horrible towards women and very horrible towards the LGBT community. And this also leads to our other point about overlooking abusive actions that are committed by religious people and their leaders, i.e. the Catholic Church. Can't forget about that. And how many of you are familiar with the late Bishop Eddie Long? So for those of you who aren't familiar with him, Eddie Long was the leader, the bishop of New Birth Baptist Church, New Birth Church in the Metro Atlanta area. Ironically, he died on Dr. Martin Luther King's actual birthday in 2017. And this gentleman who led a march with George W. Bush protesting same-sex marriage was discovered as carrying on very inappropriate relationships with young men in his church. And how often, how familiar is this story sounding? The ministers who are preaching morality and how other people should live their lives, and often what they speak against are often caught doing the very same things that they are telling other people not to do. But yet, these people often get a pass. They are often readily forgiven, and his congregation did just that until he passed away. Now, he did come under heavy scrutiny and criticism, but ultimately, he was forgiven for that. And unfortunately, the victims of these actions are often overlooked. They're often disregarded, as is the case for many of these very prominent people who commit these actions against, especially the young people. It takes money from the community, but doesn't sufficiently give it back. Now, there are many people who, again, while we give the church some credit, I honestly think it gets too much credit. There was a report that stated that basically stated that the black church in particular has generated over $400 billion since the 1980s, which was the advent of the prosperity gospel. Once the civil rights era ended, and during the 70s and 80s, there was a push for the prosperity gospel, which was perpetuated by Reverend Ike. It became very popular. The sentiment is the more you give to your church, the more your blessings will come. Now, there's a good documentary called Black Church Inc. as well, in which it talks about the business of the church, how it has made many a preacher, pastor, etc., very wealthy. We see them with these mega churches, with these big buildings that hold thousands of people who are supporting a ridiculously extravagant lifestyle while people are still struggling to pay their bills. There is a problem with that. And unfortunately, within our communities, again, we hold the pastor's position up to a very, very high, in a very high regard, and there is often very little accountability in that. And when you see the conditions of the communities around these churches with that much wealth in the community, as well as a lot of these statistics about the health issues that we have in our community, as also the economic, as well as the economic disparities, we have to address this issue. But also, it keeps people in fear and from seeking help and solutions that are needed. There are still too many of us who want to pray our problems away, who want to give it to God. Jesus, take the wheel. But it is not working. And now there is a push for more clinical solutions within the black community, but it has come at, we're kind of behind the curve there. It was only up until a few years ago that certain churches started addressing the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and the excuse that many of these leaders gave was that there was nothing in the Bible about it. But yet you have people in your communities dying. You have people in your communities that are suffering. And again, with this institution that generates so much wealth within the black community, there is no excuse for that. But also, it keeps, again, we're talking about the fear of atheism and letting go of religion altogether. So when you are a person of color, particularly within the black community, to openly question and challenge the church often means that you are dealing with a heavy emotional tie to this institution. And so in addition to letting go of God and religion, it is seen that you are letting go of your identity as being black or a person of color. Oh, you're doing what those white people do. So added to the stigma of leaving religion behind and questioning it, that A word is almost still forbidden. And to understand, I remember there was a woman who told me that she couldn't believe that as a black atheist, she couldn't believe that as a black woman, that I had the nerve to identify as an atheist in front of these white devils, and that I had a slave mentality. She felt sorry for my mama and my kids. And that is actually on video. You can find it. If you Google it, you can find it. But these are often some of the things that we have to deal with, and you must understand why there is a hesitation and also the sense of isolation from many of us in finding more people who can identify and understand. And that is where Black Nonbelievers as an organization has come in. And so for the past 8 years now, we have been working to build the communities and provide support, as well as increase the visibility for blacks who are either questioning their religion in favor of leaving, or who have already let it go, but they are still dealing with the stigma of openly identifying as atheists. And so for the past few years, I remember the first meetup I ever attended, the first atheist meetup I ever attended. This was in 2011. I had just re-identified as an atheist. And I had found online communities. I found online spaces where there were Black atheists, which in itself was very refreshing. I also became reacquainted with American Atheists as an organization, and I realized that there was a broader community out there. But in speaking with other Black atheists online, they expressed their hesitations with attending predominantly white meetups and some of the experiences they had. And so in trying to engage the community, I gave it a shot. And it wasn't a bad experience, but I understood what they were talking about after I attended that meetup. So what started as locally as Black Nonbelievers of Atlanta in 2011 and holding regular events, bringing people together, actually turned into something much more in 8 years, because as we got going and started engaging, there was interest in starting similar groups in different cities. And so from there, not only have we provided, or at least we provided that support and community, and giving people that chance to, just heal, connect, and express themselves, we've also been able to turn that into a real sense of visibility and advocacy. And we've done that through media appearances. One is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, as mentioned before, CBS Sunday Morning. We are also multi-generational. We are reaching atheists and people who are secular, from the younger folks to the more mature, I won't say old. So, and really, if you look at your average meetup, you've probably never seen in previous years this many Black folks in one space. So therefore, especially this many Black atheists. But due to our work, we have been able to change that and change the number of people who attend larger events, as well as people who are getting involved. The books that you see over there in the corner, the Ebony Exodus Project by Candace Gorham, that is an anthology that is available on Amazon, and it does feature not just myself, but also other women who were involved with the organization, and it discusses why some Black women are leaving religion. So we have also contributed a great deal to content and evidence and research into our demographic so that other people can find it. And also there was another book, Emancipation of a Black Atheist, which was one person's personal journey out of religion. But he came to our meetings and did research and spoke with us to get some information and resources for his book. So we have contributed to a number of initiatives over the past 8 years, and we have effectively increased the voices as well as increased the amount of activism that has come from the Black atheist demographic. And so we weren't just talking the talk about what needed to be done. We started walking the walk, because I'm not a person who likes to sit around and just wait for something to happen. We have to make it happen. And in 2017, we also launched our Being Changes Lives campaign. Over the course of these past 8 years, we have had members and others who have said that not only have we changed their lives, that we have saved their lives. And our campaign is a collection of testimonies from members and allies. It costs you nothing to submit. And we turn them into memes that are featured on our social media. And the social media hashtag is Being Changes Lives. And they can be submitted anonymously. You don't have to be open and out as an atheist in order to tell your story. In fact, you also don't have to be out as an atheist to participate with us, although one of the goals of our organization is to encourage people to openly identify at their own pace, because guess what? That is how we change things. When we openly identify, I know some people don't like labels, but guess what? Labels provide information. So this is what we seek to do. And I'm just going to walk over here and read one of them real quick for those of you who cannot see. So one of them says, most days I want to die. I struggled with suicide and low self-worth for most of my life. One day I got the courage to tell my dad about the first man to touch me. The next day I watched him shake that man's hand in church. Every pain I had to pray away with no relief. My father, his mother, his brother, and both sisters are ministers. I've always been different and searched relentlessly for people who looked and felt like me. Then I found being. I love how inclusive you are. You let people discover themselves and encourage us on this journey to be free of religion, aka bondage. The connections alone are worth being a part of your organization. Never go away, please. Thank you. And why this is important is because religion and the church does not have the monopoly on human engagement, fellowship, and connections. As a matter of fact, I think as atheists and humanists, we tend to care more about people because it's for the sake of, and not because we think there's going to be was this the right thing to do? And so now we get into another segment here of, are you really an ally? So over the past few years, the question about diversity and inclusion has come up. How do groups attract more people of color? How do they attract more women? How do we attract more young people? And there's always a really good discussion around this, but not much practice. And again, because I am I try to be a practical person and try to put things into motion. And in addressing this issue, and again, this comes up quite frequently. And this can go for non-POC or even believers who are, Black believers, because I have had the fortune of engaging a couple of pastors who were very open and understanding. So now is a good time for people, even if you don't identify as atheists or if you are not a person of color, if you are an ally, here are some don'ts and do's. I don't do do's and don'ts. We're going to do don'ts and do's. So the first thing is, one, don't assume you can't help. Please don't assume that if something pertains to a specific community or a specific demographic, that it does not apply to you, period. So I'll give one example. How many of you are familiar with Dragon Con in Atlanta? No? Yeah. So Dragon Con is a huge fandom, sci-fi, cartoon, TV. It's a huge convention that takes place every Labor Day weekend. It's an amazing convention. If you've never had the opportunity to go, I highly recommend it. There are a lot of interesting tracks there, including a paranormal track, which is, but anyway, there's also a skeptic track. But there was a gentleman who attended a talk that I had, my talk at the skeptic track. And he told me that he sat in on another panel where there were women that were in engineering and science. And that there was one Black woman who said that she didn't think, it just came out of nowhere, that she didn't think that there were any other Black atheists out there. And we're talking about last year in 2018. And his response to me was, well, I was just going to see how you could handle that. I said, but well, I wasn't there. I wasn't there to hear that woman speak. It was just a matter of saying, hey, I know this organization that is run by a Black atheist woman. You should go and talk to them. So something as simple as that would have made a huge difference. So never assume that you cannot help, because this is important for all of us. Also, don't assume that we all care about the same issues or that we even think alike. Now, there are many racial justice issues on the table that, from what I understand, there was just one recently where a cop was acquitted of shooting a young black male. Now, this is all important for all of us. However, the black community is not a monolith. We never have been. We never will be. So please don't seek to heap all of the issues of the black community on a few people's shoulders. We may or may not necessarily care about these things equally. And so never assume that, for one, that there is no diversity within the black community itself, because there is. Don't dismiss the importance of our groups. Again, we have a number of people who ask, why black nonbelievers? We are all one human race. You know, we are all atheists, humanists, etc. However, considering the numbers and also the visibility issue, as well as, again, the high level of religiosity within the black community, there was a need to come out and form this group. There was a gentleman who also, don't become defensive when we discuss our concerns or even when we assert them. A few months back, the American Humanist Association publicized an event in DC where I was speaking. And so there were a few white people who wanted to know, well, again, they did the whole, why is there black nonbelievers? This is racist and such. And one guy had the nerve to say, well, this is like calling myself White Johnny. Those of you who are on my Facebook page, you may remember this. So I looked at White Johnny's page, and we had 7 friends in common, and no surprise, all of them were white. And so I had time that day. I called him on it. I said, this is very interesting considering that all of our mutual friends are white. Please make sure you go look at our website to see what we're about first before you make a comment. And unfortunately, this is what we see a lot of people do. And of course, he got defensive, and I said, well, I didn't. He said, well, you're saying I'm racist. I didn't say you were racist. But as significant as that was, or how sad as that was, this organization is not called Black Mandisa. It is called Black Nonbelievers. And if it isn't totally about me, it is not about you. There is a way to discuss the systemic and collective institutional problems and not take it personal. So it isn't about our feelings when we talk about these things. Now, it can to some extent, but you would have to check that and why it is affecting you in that way. So, and please don't say I don't see color or race, because the truth of the matter is most times in these groups you really don't see you really don't see people from different backgrounds. And to say that you don't see color or race means that you are potentially not seeing the other issues that affect these marginalized groups. And it is very dismissive, and it is very disrespectful. And also it could contribute as to why you may or may not see more people of color participating and engaging. So these are the things that you really shouldn't do. Definitely, I wouldn't even say you try to avoid them. Just don't do them. But do, because I don't want to end this on a bad note, do listen and learn. Part of our issue within the secular community is that we love to talk. We love where we pride ourselves on our intellectual capabilities, how many books we read, how many big words we know, as well as how many, scholars, we can quote, etc. However, when it comes to addressing people from different backgrounds and addressing more social issues, the point is to listen, that we don't always have to talk. And in providing support, sometimes it is best to just listen and also learn from other people, because there is a lot that we have to offer. Do adjust your attitudes and actions when presented with new information. Now, our community tends to, again, we are very heavily intellectual. We may not necessarily consider our social interaction, which can be very disrespectful. And in the past few years, unfortunately, there have been some very prominent people within the secular community who have been shown to exhibit some very, very damaging behavior. They've been committing some very bad actions against people. And so if you find that you are confronted with this, if you have members of your groups who you find that if you find that they may kind of exhibit some behavior that isn't necessarily warm and welcoming or engaging, and we tell you about it, do adjust and listen and correct it. Because when we know better, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do better. Do make sure we're sufficiently a part of input, which means make sure that you are encouraging more people of color, more women, and more diverse people to be a part of your boards. And also make sure it's not just a one-time effort. It should never be simply during Black History Month or other months. This needs to be more consistent, and that's part of it. I promise you, when there's a certain level of representation that is shown in your groups, the dynamics do change. Do collaborate and participate, and again, not just as one-time efforts. If there are other groups in your areas, particularly that target people of color or other marginalized groups, and there are other issues that you have in common, do offer to work with them and participate with them genuinely and with authenticity, and not just with the sole purpose of trying to get a better body count or just with the intentions of just trying to push your message. Please do make sure that your goals and missions align and sufficiently work with other organizations and people to really, this is how we apply our humanism. Also, have information and resources available. So now that you know about Black Nonbelievers, you can point people in our direction. And we can also establish a better working relationship with each other. And if there is something that you can offer to people of color and other marginalized groups, if your organization has the resources to do that, then and also any resources that we may be able to provide. So reciprocation is very, very important here. Last but not least, donate and support. So Black Nonbelievers is a 501c3 organization. Donations to us are tax deductible. And we encourage regular contributions because this is how we grow our groups, our organization. So I mentioned that we started in Atlanta in 2011. I'm happy to say that we are now up to our 14th group across in the United States. Our most recent group was started in the Richmond, Virginia area. So we are growing as an organization, just like we are growing in our demographic. And that isn't the only way you can support. We encourage everyone to participate with us, even if it is just to show up and listen and learn. You do not always have to be the one talking. And so, and also, who asked the question of if you wear a Black Nonbeliever shirt, would it be appropriation? Look at some of the people who wear our stuff. There you go, right there. So there's your answer. I say no, because not only does it support us, it also gives people information about our organization and that we exist. And it clearly has our website on it. And just like you would wear your other atheist apparel and gear, we also have a very, very powerful slogan, walking by sight, not faith. Because the Black community, again, really there is a strong emphasis on faith in our community. And it's like, no, we walk by sight here. So here are two of our events that are of note for this year. The first one is the first ever Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference that will take place in Chicago from October 4th through the 6th. We encourage as many people. All of the presenters will be women of color in this movement who are doing some very important and fabulous work, who often don't get the credit and recognition that they deserve. And so we're proud to partner with Black Skeptics Group and the Women's Leadership Project, which is based out of Los Angeles. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Sakivu Hutchinson, who was also on the cover. And so it will feature all of the women who were on this cover here, and many others. And also our third annual cruise convention, which has now been retitled BNC Con 2019. And we're sailing out of Miami, going to Ocho Rios, Grand Cayman, and Cozumel. And we have some fabulous speakers, again, not just including myself, but also Bridget Crutchfield, Dr. Darrell Ray. How many of you know Darrell Ray from Recovering from Religion? So he's also the author of The God Virus, Sex and God, as well as he created the Secular Sexuality podcast, which is now produced by the Atheist community of Austin. So he's a wonderful, wonderful person. He's been an ally to us since the beginning. And I also facilitated Recovering from Religion meetup in the Atlanta area. So our organization is not only event-based. We started putting on larger events, and we also work with the other organizations. And sponsorship opportunities are available for both events. So if you cannot attend, but you would like to support someone else attending, you may do so. So there are opportunities for both events on that. And here are just some other references and resources. The first is it's 4 years now, so it may be a bit dated, but it's still very relevant. The Confessions of a Black Atheist, which was featured on CNN's website 4 years ago after the special titled Atheists, and they got complaints about their lack of diversity in the program. Some of you may remember it, but this article is still up on their website. You also have Contradiction, A Question of Faith, which is a documentary by Jeremiah Kamara. He produced the books Holy Lockdown and The New Doubting Thomas. He's also coming out with a new documentary called Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism. And he was featured on our cruise for the past 2 years. He's an amazing documentarian and just a really amazing person. Also, Moral Combat, which was written by Sakivu Hutchinson. Right now, she is touring a play, which is an adaptation of her novel White Knight's Black Paradise, which discusses the Jonestown tragedy. And also, we have a YouTube channel. Black Nonbelievers does have a channel on YouTube. Some of our previous there's some videos of our presentations and just some other stuff that we have done. So please feel free to just YouTube that to see some of the stuff that we have here. So in closing, as John said, I now do activism full time. Last year, I made the decision to leave my full-time job in addition to growing the organization, in addition to having a family of 3 children. In addition to, I'm married as well. As the movement grew, as the organization grew, I decided that it was time to take the leap into full-time activism after being at this particular job for almost 10 years. And so one way that I support my activism is through Patreon. And so you can, for as little as $1 a month, you can subscribe, and I create community building content as well as atheism-ish discussions. And part of what I write is sort of a glimpse into my life, is a glimpse into some of my thoughts that I can't necessarily share publicly on social media. Because I tend to be a very provocative individual. I will not lie about that. One of the missions and what I incorporate into the organization is for people to be open about not just their point of view about their atheism or their non-belief in their secularism. We are very, very pro-LGBTQ. We are very pro-sexual expression and very pro-progressive measures, period. And so I give a glimpse into my thoughts and my life, how I raise my children, and also just some best practices for other organizers and just for people in general. Sometimes I just spill my guts, but it's a little fun to read. But what this does is that, there are times where we will have to overcome fear. I know I certainly did that when I took the leap into full-time activism. I certainly had to overcome that fear when I re-identified as an atheist and starting this organization. There is a fear that people need to overcome when we express ourselves. And we have the right to be who we are, regardless of whether who likes it or not. And the more we come out, the more we stand up for ourselves, the more we engage each other and the religious community, we can help normalize our position, normalize our actions, and help other people overcome those fears as well. And so, look at this face. I have a smiling face. There really is nothing to fear here. And many of us, there's really nothing to fear really with all of us. So as atheists or people who are questioning and such, we can really help move not just the conversations forward, but also our actions into the future. Thank you.